One of the most baffling and unfortunate trends in the Hunter x Hunter community lies in the way some people interpret the protagonist of the story himself, especially the transformation he undergoes in the Chimera Ant arc. Gon Freaks, the young boy at the face of the story, the emblem of the story's spirit of adventure, a beacon of curiosity, light, and stubborn resolve, has over time become synonymous with something far darker in the eyes of many fans. An increasingly popular interpretation has taken root: the idea that Gon is a monster in disguise, unhinged and morally bankrupt, a wolf in sheep's clothing. This interpretation is often paired with the various parallels Gon shares with Meruem, the king of the Chimera Ants, born a predator with no understanding of human life or value, who gradually became softer and kinder. Through Komugi, Meruem became more human, and Gon is thought to walk the opposite path, beginning as a child full of empathy and devolving into something of a monstrosity. It's definitely an appealing contrast. Duality sits at the core of the story, it's even in the very title, and the parallels between the two characters absolutely do exist. There is a poetry in the symmetry of their character journeys, but the conclusion many people reach when observing their dynamic is absolutely misguided. This reading of Gon is not only overly simplistic, but misses the mark on what Togashi hopes to achieve with the broader commentary surrounding his main protagonist and various other characters in Hunter x Hunter. Gon's arc isn't one of corruption and moral degradation. It's a story of emotional fragility, the weaponization and pitfalls of innocence, and most crucially for this video, the catastrophic cost of leaving a child alone in a world designed to break him. The real tragedy of Gon Freaks is not that he turns into something monstrous, it's that he was never taught how not to. This is the tale of a boy shaped by a world that refuses to acknowledge his age, needs, or pain. And rather than discuss the outcomes ad nauseum, I'd like to use this video as a magnifying lens and place it over the most culpable elements: the stage around Gon and the other actors he interacts with. The world that almost feels designed to convince this kid that emotional repression is normal and that power is the highest virtue, that might makes right and Gon simply needs to fight through his problems. Gon's upbringing set him on a precarious path from the very beginning, with almost every aspect of his character stemming from his deep-rooted abandonment issues. Many of the adults in his life failed him because the world of hunters is one built on ego and ambition, one that actively encourages emotional dysfunction. And that's the main thing I want to address in this video. This isn't a Gon did nothing wrong video, because Gon, he makes a lot of selfish and even cruel choices. But rather than ask, is Gon a monster, I want to pose a different and, in my opinion, more meaningful question. What happens when a child is thrust into a world of adults and left to fend for himself? Gon is introduced as someone in tune with the world around them, in harmony with nature, surrounded by wildlife in a state of deep focus as he fishes for the master of the swamp. He grew up on Whale Island, a rural outpost with little technology, politics, and exposure to the outside world. The only other child on the island is a little girl by the name of Noko, and Gon's closest companion is a fox bear he personally named Kon as an echo of himself. He raised Kon after it was orphaned as a cub because Kite killed its mother to save Gon, and that is how they met. Gon insisted that Kite spare the cub and allow him to raise it himself, despite Kite's insistence that this was a pointless endeavor and that it was fated to grow up and hate humans for taking its mother. And yet, it grew up to become Gon's best friend. It grew up to love a human. This flashback in the very first chapter definitively outlines Gon's heart and empathy. So powerful, it defies the fate Kite had projected. Raised by his aunt Mito, Gon enjoyed a peaceful childhood, but that fateful encounter with Kite changed the trajectory of his life. Mito hid the truth about Jing in order to protect Gon from his overbearing legacy and the outside world at large. Gon doesn't know what it means to be a hunter, nor what a father should be, so he fills in the blanks himself. Jing must be doing something so important that it justifies leaving his own child behind. So if he wants a place in his father's life, he'll have to hunt him down just as he witnessed from Kite. He must earn a stamp of approval. This entire motivation is built on a very shaky premise. He wants to meet a father he knows nothing about, to understand this myth of a man that the one who saved his life seemed so proud of, and learn why Jing chose to be a hunter over being with his family. Kite is the conduit. He's somebody Gon idealizes and looks up to because he saved his life and told him the truth about his parents. And this person he holds on such a high pedestal equally holds Gon's father on an even higher pedestal, which fuels his curiosity and tempts Gon to journey into the mysterious unknown. Given the fact he's a sheltered child raised on an island insulated from civilization, Gon is primed to internalizing the values of others. He is a sponge, absorbing everything he comes across in the process of maturity. This is a coming-of-age story after all, and we see the complete process of Gon's growth taking place right before our very eyes, as he forms a moral compass, among other things. This is important to note, because a lot of the fandom's perception of Gon's morality fails to account for the fact that he's a kid. So of course he doesn't have an established moral code because he's in the process of forming one. Even so, there are various core values instilled in him throughout the journey, and right at the very beginning we see two of the most important. From Mito, he learns to value honesty and conviction in his words, to truly mean what he says. From Kite, he learns to finish off what he started, and in that specific context, that is his enemies. Despite being like a sponge, Gon is by no means fickle. He doesn't undergo a dramatic personality shift over the course of the story. There are changes, but they're very subtle, and most of the differences we see in him are often just a reflection of the context surrounding him, revealing new layers that were already present. The world around Gon, that is what changes a lot, and the conflicts he finds himself in grow more harsh, more contradictory, and more ambiguous. And all the while, he's a 12-year-old, and the audience is rarely ever reminded of that fact, that Gon is a child, and that is where much of the tension stems from. Most characters in Hunter x Hunter are products of their environments, their upbringing, their social standing, their natural gifts and weaknesses. These are some of the countless things that shape the trajectory of their lives. Beanoltz became a serial killer because of his experiences. He grew up poor and learnt the horrors of the world's apathy at a very young age when he tried to help a wealthy couple, only to be beaten close to death. Saridnik was warped by a life of luxury without compassion. He had the world at his fingertips and grew up believing this was his birthright, and that he is simply above and better than others, and so no wonder he became who he is today, the ultimate reflection of his kingdom's normalized depravity. Every character whose background we know fits the bill. Gyro, Krollo, Kurapika, the list goes on. Gon Freaks is no different. A product of his environment, that being the natural world. The forest, the swamp, the animals that inhabit them, an island closed off from civilization. And all of this makes him pure and innocent, a child of the earth, a blank canvas that operates on primal instinct. And while that's endearing and quite beautiful, it can also be a very dangerous way to be, especially in this world. He lacks experience, he's a ball of instinct that follows his whims. He'll befriend an assassin if he likes their vibe, and he'll condemn a good person assuming he gets the wrong impression. Gon doesn't have a code of ethics. He didn't have anybody to really instill that into him. Mito did what she could, but the boy had an affinity to nature, and thus his gut, his instincts, is really all he has. The story of Hunter x Hunter is essentially one exploring what happens when a child is removed from the fish tank or small aquarium they've only ever known and thrown straight into the ocean. The very first plunge into the depths of this ocean is the Hunter exams, and this sets the tone for what's to come by shaping Gon's perception of strength. It's literally a death gauntlet where hundreds die every year, and yet it's open to anybody, including 12-year-olds. Almost every stage is a test of strength, with its final stage, arguably the most important as the ultimate barrier into a new world, literally being comprised of a series of one-on-one battles. And so Gon naturally comes to view strength as the currency of worth in the world of hunters. And if Jing is one of the greats, then surely that means he's also very strong. And naturally that also means that Gon too must become very strong to be worthy enough of meeting his father. The following arc is wholly dedicated to exploring Gon's chaotic need to become stronger and stronger. And that's because his first outing in the real world was completely defined by strength. The very first words Gon hears from his father includes the statement, "Hunters are egomaniacs willing to cast aside everything to get what they want." This is his role model, his ideal, and this is all he has to work with about his mentality. So Gon obviously takes these words very close to heart. It's a challenge from his father. If you're truly a hunter, come and find me. Cast aside absolutely everything in your pursuit of me. and accompanying that invitation are clues to find Jing, namely a save file of the Greed Island game he designed for his son. This is key, because it colors Gon's mindset throughout the latter half of his journey. He views both the events of Greed Island and the Chimera Ant arcs as trials to prove his worth if he wishes to meet his dad. He wholly believes Jing deliberately constructed everything as a test. The stakes are sky high for him, and he's completely fixated on making it through these events and reaching his destination, reaching his father. In that sense, some part of Gon from Greed Island onwards antithesizes the main theme of the story, to enjoy the detours. I don't think this is completely the case because he is still incredibly free-spirited and doesn't let the end goal define him on the path there, but he is definitely allowing his assumptions of Jing's intentions to drive him through that latter half of his journey, to color his perspective and make everything feel so much more monumental. Gon mythologizes his father. He views Jing as a living legend who is so awesome, of course he has to go through hell and back simply to earn the right to be in his presence. It's this incredibly elaborate and complex mixture of emotions. In some ways a coping mechanism, convincing himself his father is just that great rather than confronting the uncomfortable reality that he was abandoned by him and this father never made time to visit. There's an all-important line from Mito in chapter 1 that was unfortunately omitted from the anime, where she claims that Jing never abandoned him and she made him give Gon up. And so in other ways, he does genuinely believe that his father is that great, leading a life that would be unsafe for a growing boy. But just because Mito makes this claim doesn't mean Jing didn't abandon him, and more pertinently, it definitely doesn't mean Gon doesn't suffer from abandonment issues. Everybody's gonna have their own opinions on whether or not Jing is a bad father and how bad of a father he is. That's not what I'm concerned with here. Gon himself feels abandoned. So much of his behavior very clearly stems from those issues, and many of the scenes people point to when calling him a monster or a psychopath are clear-cut examples of a child who is willing to do anything to be perceived as adequate by his father and finally meet him. A constant in the commentary and philosophy of Hunter x Hunter is the friction and general emphasis on children versus adults. Our main duo, Gon and Killua, are children in a world of adults, a world of hunters, a designation which itself is subject to various conflicting interpretations. If you asked Hisoka, he'd tell you a hunter is someone who clutches their desires no matter what. If you asked Kite, who is hardly a saint, he'd tell you that all good hunters get along well with animals. If you asked Netero, perhaps the most morally dubious character in the series, as well as the chairman of the association for the bulk of the story, he'd tell you something else. Something about heart or some shit. I'm not gonna pretend like I know what he'd say. But at its core, at a very fundamental level, the idea of hunters is aligned with youth, with children. They're an idealistic bunch captivated by the spell of the unknown, chasing after desire. In that sense, I would argue Hisoka is the ultimate hunter in the story, but that's a point for another video. Despite the core of hunter lifestyle being aligned with youth, the majority of them are obviously adults, and the world somewhat forces them to bury that childlike core beneath the other things that define them, like responsibilities, tradition, the maintaining of the status quo. This is an incredibly loaded topic, one I haven't really given enough time and research to really do any justice for, but for the purpose of today, it's important to note that there's a consistent struggle between childlike idealism and adult realism, which can be best found in the characters of Killua and of course Gon. In hindsight, the entire story up to the Chimera Ant arc is a brutally slow build-up for these children, making it through impossible odds by the skin of their teeth time and time again, until finally the time comes for a serious reality check. They're naive. I mean, they're children. But even in this regard, they are very different from each other, opposites in some ways. Killua is defined by his relationships with the adults in his life, the Zoldycks, who obsessively tried to mold him into a suitable heir for the family. Gon is defined by an adult who wasn't there. Killua's programming comes from presence, intense supervision, whilst Gon's comes from absence and abandonment, which brought forth curiosity, and that perfectly aligns with the kind of upbringing he had. If Gon ever wanted to learn something, he would find out for himself. He's a child of the earth. Over the course of the story, Gon does form relationships with various adults who could guide him. And guide him they do. Wing, Bisky, even Netero to an extent. But the fact of the matter is that all of these adults fail Gon. The terrifying transformation he undergoes in Chimera Ant could have been prevented by any one of them. But they never stop to think if he's emotionally prepared for what this path holds, instead granting him tools that would take him further along the path. They're hunters after all. They're driven by curiosity just like him. The very same adults who point out his concerning qualities are the ones who enable him and train him. They want to see what he could become. They comment on the flaws of his mindset, but never do they actually speak to him and try to correct them. So of course, the boy naturally comes to believe emotional suppression is normal and getting stronger is the utmost priority. Gon's stubbornness is one of his key traits that is equally endearing as it is terrifying, and it's best seen in his battle with Hanzo. His refusal to quit outlines his abandonment issues and desire to be strong enough, or rather worthy enough, to meet his father. It's somewhat of a defense mechanism, a way to avoid the pain of abandonment by turning it into a game and leveling up to unlock his father's presence. He has a few screws loose, and so many people take note of this, but nobody tries to drill new ones in and teach valuable lessons. Even Hisoka's obsession with Gon ripening, as he would put it, isn't only because he sees him as a worthy opponent in the future. Just like the other adults Gon encountered on his journey, Hisoka wholly recognizes Gon's concerning character traits, his stubbornness, his pride, his selfishness. But of course, these aren't concerning in the eyes of Hisoka, they're exciting. He sees a kindred spirit. He knows Gon could turn into a force as destructive as himself, if not worse, if he is left unchecked without proper nurturing. And Gon never really gets that. He is left unchecked and grows like a wildflower in ever-changing environments that progressively get darker and darker. The Chimera Ant arc is where Gon's emotional framework begins to collapse, where everything he was once rewarded for comes back to bite him. But crucially, I don't believe any of what happens in this storyline is an indictment of Gon himself, but rather the adults in the world around him who facilitated this path. He was literally sent to Kite, and in turn the ants, because of Jing's whims. When Kite is killed, he is allowed to act on his rage by none other than the chairman of the association, who uses Gon as a soldier in a mission of world-shaking stakes. It's so easy to forget because people usually treat him no differently to other peers and rarely ever take it into account, besides occasionally using it as an insult. But this is a kid, a 12-year-old kid, a kid who behaves like a kid with childish responses to events. People often point to the scene in Yorknew where Gon calls out the Phantom Troop's hypocrisy in mourning their friend's death despite having slaughtered countless people themselves. It's usually framed with irony when citing, like, haha, Gon does the same thing in the Chimera Ant arc, making him a hypocrite as well, and personally, I think that's a very shallow takeaway. The main distinction between Gon and the Phantom Troop is that Gon is in complete emotional turmoil when faced with Pitou protecting Komugi, while the Phantom Troop take lives casually without a care in the world. When it comes to Komugi, Gon found himself in a catch-22, his values in conflict forcing him to compromise, values that were still in the process of being formed, by the way. Just look at his facial expressions and body language here. He is absolutely distraught by how things have turned out. He's struggling to process the nuance of the situation and desperately wishing things could be simpler, wishing that Pitou was the simple black villain to his white hero. He wants Hunter x Hunter to be a simpler story, but the situation is grey beyond Gon's wildest imagination, and as someone who operates on instinct, he is frozen at a crossroads. And the decision he reaches is that the compassion that would usually be extended to Komugi is sacrificed by his need to redeem and repay his debt to Kite, his savior. He's stuck between a rock and a hard place, and he makes a decision that eats him up inside. Both decisions would have ate him up inside, but the need to keep his word like he was taught by Mito is ultimately what Gon prioritizes. It's a dark moment for him, and he's well aware of this himself, but by no means is Togashi condemning his 12-year-old main protagonist as a monster. As I said earlier, the real indictment is on the adults who allowed Gon to even be in this room in the first place. Look at the way Netero casually points to Pitou's location. It has literally become a meme because it's so funny. He's likely sending this kid to his death, and he does it in the most nonchalant and careless way you could imagine. When it comes to the dynamic with Meruem, I think the children versus adults theme has a huge role to play. Komugi isn't as young as Gon, since we know she's been playing Gungi professionally for over 10 years, but her presentation is obviously very childlike. She's almost infantile, she feels much younger than even Gon and Killua, and she is the one to brighten Meruem's soul, to give him warmth and clarity. Gon was darkened by the adults around him, his heart made colder and his emotions in disarray. That is absolutely crucial. This isn't a dynamic of a monster becoming human and a human becoming a monster. It's not that simple. It's the story of two children who are initially defined by their instincts, undergoing opposite forms of nurture in wildly different environments. While Meruem experiences an emotional awakening, learning what it means to be vulnerable and feel love, Gon experiences an emotional collapse. But by the end of this story, both of them are just as human as each other. Chimera Ant is the biggest low in Gon's life so far, and there are other moments earlier in the story where he makes the wrong decision or has a toxic response to things he's seeing. But all of those examples have an underlying explanation that can be traced back to the influence of adults around him, even those who are absent yet whose impact is everywhere nonetheless. Gon is undeniably flawed. He has a deep capacity for darkness, and we see that completely unleashed in perhaps the most iconic sequence of the story. But this is not his nature. What makes the transformation so horrifying is that it shows you the end point of the path that Gon was on. It shows you what happens when a child is left to fend for himself emotionally in a world that teaches strength as the only virtue. Even as he mutilates Pitor, Gon is crying. He is suffering. This isn't what he wants, but he feels like it needs to be done. And that fact alone is enough to expose the stupidity of labeling him as a monster. The saving grace lies in the impermanence of this form, the temporary nature of Gon's transformation. It's like he skipped to the finish line of what this dark path had for him, went through a terrible, life-changing experience, but managed to see the light on the other side and take it as a lesson. Losing his Nen was a blessing in disguise. It cut his path short before it could spiral even further out of control. And most importantly, Gon is not defined by the emotional breakdown whatsoever. And what really matters is how he moves forward from this low point, what he does next. Thanks to the love of his friends, Gon is saved and manages to end his journey on an incredibly positive note, with a beautiful outlook on the world, with love and care for others and relationships that mean the world to himself and the people he shares them with. To close the curtain on his journey, he returns home, reborn. With Nen being among the hunter bylaws, a necessary prerequisite to even be considered a hunter, Gon's loss of Nen functions as a symbolic exit from the supernatural world, allowing him to finally just breathe, to be a normal kid once again, with a wealth of experiences he will learn from properly, with a real, nurturing presence by his side in Mito. So I ask, is Gon morally grey or even worse, a monster? Or is he just a kid? Even setting aside all the analysis in this video, the absent father and isolated upbringing, I have to ask, what 12-year-old kid have you guys seen with a fully formed moral compass? I'll answer that for you. There isn't any. The story of this character isn't a shift from good to evil. It's honestly not even primarily about morality. It's about the failure of guidance, the collapse of a child never meant to carry the weight he did. And at the end of it all, he turns a new leaf. A boy who can finally live without feeling the need to prove himself. A boy who finally became free. So no, Gon Freaks is not a monster. He's just a kid, molded by abandonment, broken by grief, and ultimately healed by love. And to me, that makes him one of the most human characters I've ever encountered. Thank you guys for watching, and have an amazing day.